intense focus on those that really helped. And it went from a small rack in between Rick Owens and Carol Christian Pole to a big rack, to a bigger rack, to 2 racks, to 3 racks on the men's side. You know, for a certain year, it was like the highest volume of that entire store. And by that time, I had said no enough to enough wholesale accounts that I got to choose where I'd want to sell.
How are you managing, because you're also not only creating all of this, but you're also the CEO and you're running the business of this. How are you managing the cash flow side of things?
Thankfully, I had a pretty good deal with Maxfield's,
okay.
Where they would pay like a couple weeks after. And also, like, you have to understand, like, the rent on a basement is not expensive. You know, family works for free. So, you know, and I ran most of the production myself. And as I said, like, the one thing I learned from my parents is, like, don't overextend yourself. You know, remember, like, you're fallible. So I always kind of kept this distance from pushing the finances to a point where we couldn't breathe. After that first year of just selling to one store, we had like accounts around the world waiting. And the decision was not to open 100 accounts and be everywhere and explode. The decision was to pick the best in like every region and sell to them at a really like limited quantity, because I never wanted to be back in the position where I'm trying to sell someone something. I always wanted to be in the position where I created something really good and I can dictate how much is in the world. I used to believe that my personal success was really dependent on so many outside variables. And over time, I really came to learn that it's really your belief in yourself, your ability to show up consistently, and then present something of quality that can be timeless.
Around this time is when you introduced the MX-1 Moto jeans, which were explosive, to put it mildly.
Sometimes it just takes one thing to be your like pillar. I think every brand has that like one thing. You can call it like your hit single, that every concert they're gonna want you to play that song or whatever it is, regardless of how much you love or don't love that song anymore, or whether you've progressed on. And for me, it was denim, because it's one thing I didn't have to make in Europe. I could buy the best denim in the world. I can wash it in the best place to wash denim other than, you know, Japan, California, and I could be part of that process.
I've seen you talk before about very purposefully sort of throttling the growth of the denim business to keep everything balanced. And I'm curious, in these moments, you're making these decisions both as a creative director and a designer, but also as a CEO who is dealing with payroll and has a staff and you know, all these things. So how were you sort of threading that needle?
The important thing to know is that regardless of how well something is selling, you have to keep evolving and, like, of course, respecting where you come from, because I still love making denim. I still think we make incredible jeans. I like really stand by it, but I don't think it's the only thing we're great at. So it took a lot of discipline to say, okay, we are not gonna do this much of this, and we're gonna keep expanding into other categories, because aesthetics and fashion will come and go. But if you create a brand and you protect that brand, it can last through every cycle of trends in fashion and things like that. Maybe there'll be a year people will wear baggy jeans or they'll go back to skinny. It won't matter because the brand is strong and we've protected it. So not letting the audience dictate everything you make and trying to chase, you know, that one thing can really ensure your longevity if you are, you know, disciplined enough.
So the brand begins to explode, although you are tempering that growth as much as possible. How long was it from that initial capsule to the place where you felt like this is reaching that virtuous cycle of where the snowball is rolling of its own volition, and I feel confident and comfortable that the money's coming in?
I think for me, there's like never been a moment of like comfort or this thought like, oh, we made it. I don't go to sleep with that. I go to sleep with like anxiety and I'm not doing good enough and I probably should have done more and I could have done better is probably like how I'm just kind of cursed to be, you know? So yeah, there's never been a moment where I felt comfortable, like it's kind of on its own thing. It's always been, wow, this is way bigger than it was last year.
In 2019, you end up taking on your first round of investment from OTB, from Renzo. Going into it, what did you feel like were the pros and cons that you were weighing? And then being now on the other side of it, how does it feel?
When you're starting something like independently, it's like you're playing literally with your own money and your own life, really. And I kept taking the profits of the company and putting them back into the company.
Yep.
And it can be a scary thing for an entrepreneur, you know? And it's like your friend at the blackjack table where his buddies are grabbing you and being like, dude, just go take the money and like, you know, go to your room or whatever. And I was like the friend that wouldn't leave like the table. So I just feel like I could win every hand. But there does come a time where the business is so massive that you have to think whether you need help strategically, you need help with infrastructure, or you need capital. At that time, we were talking to a few different people, and OTB was great because I had made friends with the founder, Renzo Rosso, who started, you know, Diesel back in the day, and he's just like an independent, started from nothing, ended up, you know, owning a luxury group, and he was a product guy and the kind of guy you can like have like a beer with. We were able to kind of figure out something where I could still kind of control my own company, and he could be there if needed.
And so you were able to sort of de-risk yourself and take some money off the table, and then also have this support system, both strategically and financially for the brand.
I think the most important thing was really just kind of having a mentor that you can kind of call.
Yep.
That's built something really enormous from nothing.
Where I was going to just say, where have you activated that, you know, sort of most pointedly?
I think right now on the retail side, on opening our first stores, being a brand that's this new relatively, and opening your first store on Rodeo Drive during COVID.
It's a bold move.
Yeah, it was a really bold move, and a lot of people were like, "You're absolutely crazy." You know, there's no independent brand on Rodeo Drive. You know, there's no single designer since like the only two Americans there are Tom Ford and Ralph Lauren. You know, so that's really ballsy. But I also knew it's where we belonged. You know, seeing our brand perform in the context of European luxury throughout the world, in every account we were top 2 or top 3. Like, why would I not put my own store next to European luxury also? Opening that first store, and it was the highest revenue store on our block per square footage the first year.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Ferro, and Lisa Abramowitz.
It was unimaginable that we would see rates move this fast. That was not in the realm of thinking.
Just the timeline of what they knew and when they knew it. Why didn't they do anything about it?
When do we have to see the kill? It's for the Fed to respond to it. And this is really the tension.
Be informed.
You cannot be overly data dependent. You've got to have a view of where you're going.
Be prepared.
I think the earnings season might actually be
the positive surprise that people are not expecting.
Be ahead of the game.
Certainly the beginning of something we need to keep an eye on.
And that, I think, is really going to be an interesting takeaway from this moment.
You go all birds on us and you say, turn, turn, turn. Is that what we're doing right now?
Yeah, big question coming into this year for us was, when is that turn going to be?
What a fantastic conversation.
The news you need.
The president's calling on manufacturers to make more in America. It is working, and it's reflected in these jobs numbers.
The analysis you trust.
How do you take this anecdotal data and say, really, just focus on the now, because that is going to tell you where we're going?
What is the measurement of uncertainty that we have in studying the American economy?
Milton Friedman had said there are long and variable lags in the impact of monetary policy. But man, it's a long slog.
The best way to start your day.
People are tuning into this program on a daily basis.
Oh, come on, it makes for good TV.
Let's move on.
Bloomberg Surveillance, weekdays from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern. Lots happening on Wall Street.
There are so many factors at play today.
It remains tight in certain parts of the economy.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insight.
Crisis is too strong a word, and words like that get used a lot.
From business's most influential and instrumental.
America's economy needs a diversity of institutions. That's something that Wall Street pays a lot of attention to.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week, live Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Why does everybody want to be a consultant, and what are all these consultants doing?
Well, David, I think that we actually defy the label consultant, because sometimes consultant seems to imply that we only give advice. And when you look at what Accenture does, we're really different than the traditional version of a consultant. We're really about relevance and results, and that's what is driving our business.
What about a consulting project? In my example, I'm the CEO, I have a problem, I call you up, I say, solve my problem or give me a solution.
We don't operate as big companies permanently in crisis mode. And so when you think about, like, how long does it solve things, a lot of it starts with, the company being willing to set aggressive goals. And so what we are trying to do now is work with our clients to work differently and to work faster.
Business Week Radio, live weekday afternoons at 3 p.m. Eastern.
We got a little bit of talking.
Come on, are you guys ready?
Harnessing the power of Bloomberg Business Week, Carol Messer and Tim Stanovic bring you the latest news from the worlds of business, technology, politics, and more.
How does the Fed play into this and what the Fed does potentially?
This is so exhausting and this is so all-encompassing.
Listen on Bloomberg Radio and streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals.
With his brand's ascent from upstart to heavyweight complete, Amiri turned his attention to crafting a long-term blueprint that would defy passing trends and achieve the lasting impact of the fashion houses he revered. And as the company reached maturity at light speed, Amiri could also reclaim a work-life balance and invest in becoming a mentor in order to inspire and educate the next generation. 2019, 2020, and into 2021, there was an aesthetic evolution within the brand. My observational hypothesis is, you start the brand in a very mid-'80s rock-centric vibe.
Yeah.
And in that period, 2019, 2020, some more of your Far Side hip-hop influences start to sort of bleed into the brand, whether it's the footwear and eventually some of the cuts of the pants and stuff. One, was that a conscious move on your part? And two, given how celebrated and revered the silhouettes that you had created were, did you have any reticence to, shake up things that were already working?
If I was trying to build a big business, I would have done more of the same, If I wanted to build a good brand, I would evolve it. And I really chose the longevity of it. And I think that's one of the things about having like the brand as my own name. There has to be like a sense of like personal integrity there. And since the decision was to kind of expand the silhouette and expand the conversation and work on different archetypes of who my heroes are, maybe in the 80s was an inspiration for, you know, skinny rockers. Maybe in the 90s, it was an inspiration for skate kids or artists. I think pigeonholing yourself is sometimes like one of the worst things, you know, you can possibly do. I wanted Amiri to represent a lifestyle that was true to me growing up in California, me being a part of music and skate culture, and, you know, creating heroes based on what I knew and what I could relate to. My ideas usually come from a place of solution, of creating something that I feel should be there that doesn't quite exist at the moment.
You started as a bit of a renegade within fashion, and you know, by 2018, 2019, you're being nominated again and again for CFDA awards, and eventually showing in Paris, and really being embraced as a darling within fashion. What was that journey like, and where do you feel like you fit into that world today?
It's pretty tricky, right? Because the brand started with a good deal of commercial success, which is great from a business standpoint. But artistically, it makes it more difficult for you to prove yourself when you're selling hit singles, right? For me, it was never really to gain the acceptance of the establishment or anything like that. You know, that's one thing that I was kind of strict with, is I'm not doing this to get anyone's stamp of approval, you know, except for the people who are like supporting the brand. I do want to become so successful and to propose something so compelling that those institutions really at some point have to be like, this is legitimately, you know, good, and either we embrace this or we look irrelevant.
From day one, the brand has been wildly successful commercially. So how do you judge the ROI on the multi-million-dollar investment in a Paris runway show?
A lot of things are like context, you know? Virgil had this thing that he would do, did it once on like a Zoom or something, and he was like, this tin can, you know, if you see it in the garage, it's like a piece of trash. And then if you see it in a museum, you know, it's a piece of art. I always like related to that kind of thought process. And those big runway shows and those kind of platforms are really important for us in the growth of the brand, because it's a week of you see the best in the world show, you know, specifically in, you know, in the menswear weeks, and you get to see them all alongside of each other. And the brand doesn't look like a startup from LA. It looks like a heritage brand with a history, the point of view, with the perspective, because it is. It's not in a basement anymore. It's in giant garden in the middle of Paris.
What are the qualities about yourself that you hold on to the most tightly?
The conviction I have in moving forward and achieving my dreams while still maintaining the humility I had from starting with nothing.
What do you think your biggest strength as a leader is, and what is something that you continue to work on?
I think my biggest strength as a leader is probably my ability to lead from the ground floor. Like, I've never seen myself as someone who is in a different room than my team, you know, coming up with things and doing that. If you're doing the work, we are doing the work together. You know, there won't be a time where you're here on a Saturday and then I'm not here on a Saturday. I think that's always been my favorite part of what I do, is working with people and showing them that I believe in them as much as they believe in me and what we're doing, you know, because then you're really like working from the heart. I think any creative who makes something really substantial and in some ways bigger than themselves has that thought of their connection to it. And I never want to feel that we're so big that I'm not in the garage. And that's really helped me stay connected to what we started with. There's plenty of Saturdays where I'll just come to the studio with my dog and no one else, and I'll work 7 hours straight doing exactly what I was doing in the basement. And as long as I can kind of keep that energy going, I'll still feel really connected to what we do.
There are so many different facets of this business that you touch and engage with as a creative and as a business person. What parts do you get the most satisfaction from?
I recently brought on like our first CEO here, and I stepped down as CEO like a month ago, because I've just come to the realization that in order for what you do to be good, you have to care about it and you have to be happy. And in order for you to care about it, you have to enjoy doing it, because it's really hard. It's a terrible job, and I would recommend it to nobody unless you feel like you're okay suffering through every part of it because you love it so much. For me, that part was really just the creative part of imagining things in my head and making them come to life, whether it's a sneaker or a runway show. That gives me the most amount of pleasure. And I think that's where like my full potential will lie.
You've talked about having a family and that sort of creating a catalyst for urgency around, putting both feet in and committing fully to the vision of making Amiri what it could be. But being a creative also requires a certain amount of selfishness. And being a father and a husband requires a certain amount of selflessness. How do you maintain that balance?
The one thing to really kind of consider for anyone kind of going into this business is you're going to have to sacrifice a lot of time, and you're going to have to be like really selfish with your time. And people will pay the price of your disappearance. You're gonna miss a lot of things. The first 4 years of starting this company, I missed so many things with my family and my kids, and it was difficult to kind of make sense of that, because every real successful entrepreneur I talk to, at the very end, they're always asking, well, what did you think on your career? And they says, I missed the time with my kids. I didn't get any, or I wasted it all, And I was like, man, you didn't really catch a W then, did you, And that's like this common thread between a lot of like older successful people that I've met. And for me, the moment I had a chance to kind of bring people in to kind of alleviate some of those responsibilities, and I can carve out more time with my kids, I did. And the best part is that now my kids are really kind of as much into the business as I am. They come to the fashion shows, they're curious about every store. They have a sense of pride in everything that we do. And it's like almost like the time that I took away from them, I kind of gave back in a gift of that pride. Money really is just a means to an end. What's truly important are your values, your friendships, your relationships, your experiences. All those things should derive from somewhere natural and organic, never from the pursuit of money or anything materialistic.
As we approach the 10th anniversary of Amiri, you've accomplished an inordinate amount, more than many, if not almost all, in the space that are your contemporaries. What do the next 10 years look like for the brand?
I think that the next 10 years is really evolving the brand more into a world where it's not just kind of items of clothing, and It's more of something non-tangible where Amiri kind of represents a spirit or a lifestyle that connect back to California and being a teenager in Sunset Boulevard or a skater or, dreaming, There's two really big rewarding things about what we've done. One is building an amazing business, and two is building a template for the next Mike Amiri to see that you don't need to just sell your t-shirts on your website. You don't need to just sell to a couple stores and make a little money.
To that point, in 2021, you launched the Amiri Prize, which is sort of a scholarship of $100,000 that you invest in a young designer. What was the auspice for launching that program?
The Amiri Prize was really created to help foster undiscovered talent that traditionally would not have an avenue to be on the map, but not to do it in a way where here's some prize money and good luck, It's not just money, it's understanding, it's strategy, it's knowledge of how to use that money, because it can go really fast if you don't have a plan. So the Amiri Prize is very different from anything else because not only do you get $100,000 funded by us, you also get a personal mentorship with me. And then you have access to every C-level and every manager in Amiri in my company. I want there to be more of us. I want there to be a generation of brands coming out that are new and that present something new, because the whole industry really is rewarded from these new ideas kind of getting a platform.
At this point in the business, you obviously have an extremely deep investment in your product, but you also have to manage a team, you have to manage your investors, and you have to manage your customers. Is it ever okay to compromise in order to sort of sate the most of these different masters?
I don't think it's ever okay to intentionally compromise. There are going to be things you wish you did better, but to say like, I'm pretty sure this is not going to come out good, but let's just do it anyways because it'll sell, is like the worst thing you could possibly do, because that starts the beginning of you not caring about your brand and what you created, and that bleeds into everything you make, moving forward. You can't have an inch of doubt or second guessing, and when I was at that kind of basement stage, and I have the 3 kids, and there's not the luxury of thinking twice about anything, To be really successful, you have to be irrationally and audaciously and have a conviction of something grand without a doubt, though. There can't be that thing, because then you're going to get shook. So for me, when I made that decision that this was going to be that big and we were going to be successful, there was really no room for anything else.
I put that vision out there. That actually happened the way I wanted it to.
If I ever get another opportunity, I'm not gonna screw that up again.
I'm Cal Penn. Welcome to Getting Warmer.
This is cool as shit. Wow.
If you take 2 atoms and fuse them together, it gives off a huge amount of energy. Would you like to see what $20 billion buys you in the French countryside? Where is there money to be made in space?
You're at the end of the earth, and it's...
I don't have strong feelings for or against crypto. I like finance.
We have big things to come, and I can't wait to show you.
There has to be some sort of shock value.
Thought about tapping out a bunch of times.
My goal is to have anything that's deemed impossible.
It's
Sports and money. They've always gone together.
But never before have sports been so massively influential and as lucrative as they are today.
We set out to find what's happening and what's about to happen at the nexus of business, sports, and culture.
From the pickleball courts of Arizona,
to the kabaddi tournaments in India,
to the cornhole boards at your local tailgate. This is what's next in sports.
Sports and money. They've always gone together.
But never before have sports been so massively influential and as lucrative as they are today.
NFL, NBA, none of them were what they are today when they were born.
There's leagues that are being thought of and built every day.
New teams, new leagues, new business models, even entirely new sports.
I never in a million years would have thought this is what my life would be like.
Cornhole's one of the only sports in the world in which you can have male and female players playing at the highest level against one another.
I'm Jason Kelly, a business journalist and sports fan with a couple decades covering Wall Street.
Getting involved from a business perspective was something that was very natural and an easy transition for me.
I'm Vanessa Perdomo, a former college athlete and journalist working across media.
Let's do it.
All right, you ready?
We set out to find what's happening and what's about to happen at the nexus of business, sports, and culture.
I got a point.
From the pickleball courts of Arizona,
to the kabaddi tournaments in India,
to the cornhole boards at your local tailgate. This is what's next in sports.
Steve's ability on the course may not be etched into any record books, but following him around, it's clear that it's not for lack of trying.
Jeez.
We were constantly hustling behind him as he caught up with executives in the portfolio companies and reminisced with former and current players.
He's a day trader. He taught himself, self-made day trader. Yes. And so he's on the bus after a game in New England, and he's day trading on the bus, and Bill Belichick sees him and cuts him on the spot.
In many ways, it's a convention, right, of the people that I don't see maybe once a year. And so it's kind of all come together. My firm, our charity, fundraising efforts, and then the friends that are around. My dad and my brother, it all happens right there as a confluence of all these parts of my life that have found its common center.
News breaks. No one covers the world like Bloomberg.
The image of Vladimir Putin as the all-powerful leader has been rattled already.
History was made here at the federal courthouse in Miami when Donald Trump became the first ever former president to ever be arraigned on federal charges.
We're going to need a new engine technology, and that's where the real battle lies. And whoever makes that decision first is going to have a huge impact on this industry.
Bloomberg, your global business authority.
From New York City,
In London, in Sydney,
from Washington,
in Tokyo.
9 a.m. in Beijing and Shanghai.
Good morning, everyone.
Have a great evening.
Here's what I'm watching.
You do not want to miss this
He's
story.
there, the kind of upside.
This is Bloomberg.
London will stay a financial center. It will stay our EMEA hub. We'll just have a rebalancing onto the continent. And actually, the numbers of who has moved across aren't that big. So it's sort of in the 200 level. And if you think about 15,000 people, that's sort of not that material. And so I do think both will basically continue to grow and continue to be very relevant. What will change, though, and the big thing that's changing, is actually the risk-taking is what's going to move. And so we've historically had risk-taking in the UK. That risk-taking and the assets that go with it, not the people alone, but the assets that go with it, that's the next phase of what we're now moving into. And that will be a material change.
I was raised by independent people, so I wanted to continue the tradition, I guess. I never wanted to be a spectator. I wanted to be a player.
In 1988, a graffiti-obsessed 17-year-old in Astoria, Queens, had an idea. Sasha Jenkins would combine his love of art, hip-hop, and humor to found a series of highly successful independent print publications before turning his unique lens to television production and then documentary filmmaking. Along the way, he would go from documenting the culture to shaping it, all while providing a template for creativity that's informed countless careers, including mine. And it all started with one idea. How did your parents' professional life inform your career ambitions?
My dad was a filmmaker, my mom was a painter. So when I look at all the stuff that I've done, it's been a combination of moving pictures and still pictures and storytelling, right? So my parents are storytellers. And so at a young age, that was instilled in me. I would say my parents are my biggest influence, actually. My dad was mainly a documentary filmmaker, one of the founding producers of Sesame Street, the Africa correspondent for a show called Black Journal. So there's footage of him all over Africa in the 60s and 70s doing his thing. My dad died when I was really young. And like back then, you know, seeing my dad work, he did a feature film called Cane River that was only recently released after like 40 years, like a couple of years ago. But it was shot in New Orleans. I got to spend the summer there. I was on set. So I was around this stuff most of my life.
You were born in Philly, and your early life was in Maryland.
Yep.
But your sort of most formative years happened in Astoria in the late 70s, early 80s. How did that shape your worldview?
Astoria was very racially polarized, right? Although my building was very mixed, there wasn't much intermingling amongst people. In Astoria, one thing that brought people together was graffiti. That put me in a unique position to learn different things about different people, because what I realized is the white kid who likes heavy metal has a boombox, and the black kid who likes hip hop has a boombox is the same kid, the same guy. When I was coming up, I was into skateboarding, I was into hardcore music, hip hop, things that are very common today for kids of color. When I was into it, I was a weirdo black dude. Now it's like kids in the hood, which is great. Their world is way more broad. I think that's one of the reasons why I've somehow stayed contemporary, was my understanding and involvement. It's also, for me, very important to be directly involved, because I learn from hip hop, from hardcore, from graffiti, or whatever. Being a practitioner and being involved or understanding these cultures, these subcultures, has always been very germane to my evolution. I think having that experience really helped me sort of navigate the world at large.
How did you end up with things like punk rock and skating sort of on your radar?
Skating was like the 70s. I had an older sister, and we had a skateboard, and the first or second real skateboard wave. So when we moved from Maryland, I still had my little skateboard, but I got into BMX before skating, and once BMX started to fade, I got into skateboarding again. A friend of mine named Haji, who I started Beat Down newspaper with, he was into skating too, so we kind of got into it together, and we would travel to different places to skate spots. You go to the Brooklyn Banks under the Brooklyn Bridge, or the Harlem Banks in Harlem, or Bay Ridge, or different places. You would travel to go to different skate spots. It was very much like graffiti. Graffiti writers travel all over the place, skaters travel all over the place. And a friend of mine named Chaka, who was wound up being in lots of bands, he grew up in the Woodside Projects. He wanted to get into skating. He knows into rock, and he gave me a tape. And I listened to that tape. I didn't know any of the bands, and I asked him about this one specific band. I was like, what's this band right here? He's like, yo, it's the Bad Brains, and guess what? They're black. I was like, get the out of here. He's like, the Bad Brains, they're all black. I didn't know who the Bad Brains were, whatever, but something about their music spoke to me, and so I was like, I gotta buy the record. And he sold me his beat-up copy of Eye Against Eye of Bad Brains for like more money than he paid for it. But that was a gateway for me to get into a whole other world and one day be in a band with a member of the Bad Brains.
How seriously did you take your life as a graffiti writer?
I wrote, just like people skate, and there are professional skaters and there are kids who just skate. There are way more kids who just skate than there are professionals, right? So I was a kid who wrote. I wasn't anyone important, I wasn't anyone special, but what I learned from graffiti, between politics, between networking, before the internet, before cell phones, I'm meeting all kinds of kids from all over the place. And it piqued my interest in wanting to do a zine. I did more time thinking about graffiti and writing about graffiti and publishing magazines about graffiti than doing graffiti, but I'm okay with that at this point. My biggest early supporter was my mom. When I told her I wanted to do a graffiti magazine and that was going to cost me $1,000 in 1988, I didn't think she'd give me the money, and she found the money and gave it to me. That belief in me, or just being willing to take a chance, was major.
What was the auspice for you to actually get into publishing a zine yourself?
My friend Chaka, he was on the hardcore scene, and in the hardcore scene, there were zines, right? So it's a combination of hardcore zines, and then Phase 2 published a magazine called International Get Hip Times, which when I purchased that, it just blew my mind. And I wrote to Phase 2, and I was like, hey man, I'm a fan of what this zine, like I want to do one myself. He wrote me a 6-page handwritten letter telling me that I could do it. He didn't know me from a can of paint, pun intended, right? But that was like, put a battery in my back. And so my friend Chaka and his friend Freddie Alva did a hardcore compilation tape where they recorded all these bands and put it on a cassette called the New Breed Compilation. And it was in a comic book plastic, and it came with a zine, a booklet. I asked them who the printer was, and basically, if you know the New Breed Compilation, and you see the first issue of my zine, it's the same thing. So usually I learn from my friends, right? So I saw what my friends did, and it inspired me to do what I did.
And how did you put together the money to get this printed and figure out the distribution and all that part?
I asked my mom for the money, and in '88, asking my mom for $1,000 was like no small feat, and I didn't think she'd be able to get it to me, but my mom gave me the money. And as far as distribution, there was only 1 or 2 stores in the world at that time. There's a place on West Broadway called Soho Zat. Writers from all over the world would go there because it was around the corner from Henry Chalfant's studio. So you'd go to the store and you knock on the door to maybe meet Henry. And so while I was down there selling my zine, me and this guy Hush went over. He's like, let's go knock on Henry's door. Knock on Henry's door. Henry doesn't open up. Carl Weston does. Carl Weston would go on to start something called Videograph. And so all these things just happened the way they happened. All the things that I've done, I've learned from mentors. I've had great mentors. I was able to realize who I needed to get an education from. I tapped into those folks, did what I could to help them. In return, they imparted lots of knowledge on me. Henry Chalfant, for instance, was a big influence on me. I was a huge fan of his work as a kid. I'd study subway art in my art class. One day I'd go on to meet Henry, and he'd become a friend and a mentor.
So how many issues of graphic scenes did you create?
There's about 4 issues of graphic scenes that we made. The first 2 were more elaborate in terms of printing, like spending real money, and then later issues were more like the Xerox style.
And where were you getting like all the assets and the photos and all that kind of stuff to fill it?
I was snapping photos, getting some photos from Henry, getting photos from other writers. I mean, in graffiti, photographs are like trading cards, right? So I had some hot trains that people wanted, so I was able to trade with people.
And how many units of this were you selling at the time?
My zine, the first issue, I probably printed up 5,000 copies. Sold most of them.
How do you get from creating these 4 issues to creating the first hip-hop newspaper, Beatdown?
So Haji, again, who's a friend I grew up with, Haji Akibade, he's a guy I grew up with who was into skating, into graffiti, and he was a producer, right? He made hip-hop beats, and he actually kind of worked with Marley a little bit, like helping out Marley and stuff. I had gone away to a community college in upstate New York, and I worked on the school newspaper, and I saw the print bill, and it was like $600. I was like, that's it? I came back to New York, And I connected with Haji and I said, look, let's do this hip hop newspaper. It only costs whatever. We went to the printer, which is across the street from Queensbridge Housing Projects. It was like $640.30. We went with exact split in half, cash, change, everything, paid for.
And, you know, at this point, it's still very nascent stages of hip hop publishing, but The Source is happening and is a pretty big deal by 91, 92. What was it that made you want to create your own platform versus trying to sort of, you know, get a job at The Source or, you know, or work within any sort of existing structure?
I was raised by independent people, and so I wanted to continue the tradition, I guess. I had no desire to write. I take great pride and much respect to The Source and everyone who's gone through there, but I've never written for The Source. I never really wanted to write for The Source. Not that The Source isn't great, but I didn't really care. You know, for me, it's like, for years, sports, I wasn't into sports because I'm like, why am I getting excited about watching sports? It's not me doing it. I could never get into sports watching it, like being a fan, because like, what do I care about watching someone do it? But once you start to play a game and you understand it, then sports, watching sports and being a spectator becomes more interesting, right? But I never wanted to be a spectator. I wanted to be a player.
At its peak, how big did Beatdown get in those initial years that you were involved?
Beatdown really took off after we left. We were there for a year. Beatdown went on for years and became a magazine and printed and has all kinds of fans all around the world. So when I was doing it, for us, success was going to Tommy Boy and knowing that from studying The Source, Tommy Boy always took out the back cover. So we knew that Tommy Boy paying for the back cover for a couple of years paved the way. So we went to Tommy Boy and offered them the same deal. And that sort of paved the way for us to have money to publish the magazine if we had no ads for a long time.
You mentioned meeting Carl Weston, and I know that you were, you know, pretty heavily involved in some of the seminal editions of Videograph. How did you sort of, you know, fit into that creative matrix? And then what did that platform really offer you?
Back then, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and Carl wanted to be a filmmaker as well, so we had that in common. Carl was older than me and had equipment, and we talked about film and things we wanted to do, because ultimately, Videograph was a platform for him to make money to make films. So I was a younger cat in that matrix, and I was just there and then. It just started to happen.
What kind of reach did Videograph have in that moment? I think, you know, it's hard for young people today with this ubiquity of the internet to understand, but, you know, Carl was selling VHS cassettes, but they had reach.
Carl used to wear sweatpants, and sweatpants pockets are kind of loose, and he had knots like this, cash. Big ass knots. I mean, it was VHS, right? So people were buying them, but obviously, I would say 2 out of 5 writers were buying them, and like the other 3 were just bootlegging the shit. But considering how much it was bootlegged, it got around.
Big black Mac with no seeds on my bun. Chucking spears to stun. Run, Frosty, run to your unique cave, shelter from the sun. Want to step to me? That can be fun. Be alone, Yoko, or I'll be out like the flying nun.
How did the poetry moments happen?
Poetry moments and Videograph happened because I was doing poetry. Some of it was really bad, but I liked doing it. It was back when we drank 40s, we'd drink a 40 and just freestyle poetry. And it was, you know, you do that and then people recognize you on the street. And there was a commercial from my magazine in Videograph once that was based on a true story where I was walking down West 4th Street near the McDonald's that used to be there. And some kid recognized me from Videograph and said something slick. And all I did was I just literally went behind my head and did this. Like, just made a funny gesture. And 25 dudes just started chasing us through the West Village and yelling Videograph. And I was like, damn, this shit's crazy, man. So they didn't want my autograph, they wanted to hurt me.
So you start Beatdown, and, you know, in that you meet two very consequential people that would be collaborators with you for years after that, in Elliott Wilson and Chairman Mao.
Me and Haji, we did beat down, and I guess Elliott got a copy and called. We had a voicemail. He called the voicemail and said he wanted to be down. So then he got down with us. And then Chairman Mao, I was interning at a place called Third World Newsreel, which has Black Panther films and all kinds of leftist, interesting, people of color shit. And the folks there had always told me, you love hip hop, you've got to meet this guy, Jeff Mao. He's a DJ, he loves hip hop. So one day I'm in the elevator, I see an Asian guy with a bald cut and a Carhartt jacket, and I'm like, yo, you're Jeff Mao, right? And this is like, 91. And so that's how I met Jeff. And, he was a record collector and was very knowledgeable about hip hop. So that was the initial nucleus of Beatdown. And, those are cool times.
And after about a year, your relationship with Haji sours. You and Mao and Elliott all end up leaving. But what happened that sort of was the catalyst for that?
We laugh about it now. It's just stupidity, just like miscommunication, and misunderstandings and egos and just being young and not really being smart. We look back at it now and we say, wow, we were foolish to do that. But, childhood friends have squabbles. Because ultimately, that's what it was. It didn't have to be that deep. How do you tell a good idea from a bad idea? Well, sometimes a bad idea looks real sexy and tasty, but as soon as you bite into it and it feels kind of funny, don't let your ego get in the way of the hype of what you thought this thing was, or what you told people it was. If it's not right, you usually know it, and it's time to back up out of it if you can.
Beatdown was a strictly hip-hop magazine. Shortly thereafter, Ego Trip starts to come into focus, and you form a partnership with initially Elliott and then also with Chairman Mao. Mm-hmm. What was the idea for that, and what was that moment of innovation that brought that together?
It's very simple. I wanted it to be more of a reflection of my life, right? I like skateboarding, I like rock, I like hip-hop. And I also thought, what are we offering? Why does the world need another hip-hop whatever? At that point, there were more magazines. So it was very simply, if we have other stuff beyond hip-hop, it just opens us up to more advertising, right? So skate, rock, whatever, fashion. So I just wanted something that was a little bit more contemporary to kind of how I lived at that point. You have art from Mr. Caves, comic strip called Tales from the Rails. Interviews with skaters. My friend Chris Keefe was in the first issue. Chris is someone I skated with in Queens. He went on to be one of the Supreme guys and professional skateboarder, So it's it was more of a reflection of where I felt culture was going.
How did you put together the pieces to go get Ego Trip printed and then distributed as well?
Well, first we had to get money to make it. So that's when I went to Henry Chalfant. So I went to Henry and said, give me 10 grand. And I'll turn that 10 grand into much more than that. And so with that money, I think we got a computer and were able to print 1 or 2 issues.
And how did you guys conceive of the sort of business side of this partnership?
Business side is kind of an overstatement or understatement. We were just doing, right? No one was formally trained in business. It's all instincts.
That was a time where everything was very balkanized, right? Between white magazines, black magazines, women's magazines, men's magazines. Ego Trip obviously lived in the middle of a very complicated Venn diagram. When you would take these meetings to try to sell these ads, were the marketing people receptive? Did they understand your vision?
There were enough people who did, but there were a lot of people who didn't because they're still putting everything in a box. No, kids who like hip hop don't like this. What do you mean? White kids who like rock love hip hop at this point. You can't keep putting people in boxes. There were people who didn't get it, but there were enough people on the advertising side who got it and got us to a point where we even had credit with our printer. All of that coming together made Ego Trip possible because again, outside of the 10 grand, we didn't have shit.
Bloomberg UK, your source for news and analysis covering the biggest challenges facing the UK government, economy, financial services, and markets.
Tax cuts should not be the priority. It's about a credible plan for growth over the next 2-3 years.
In this post-Brexit world, how do you see actually servicing your clients?
It was disruptive, and it's going to have implications to how capital raising works.
Now we're having the perfect storm in the UK.
Watch Francine Lacqua Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. only on Bloomberg, your global business authority. The top names in business are on Bloomberg.
For Indigo, this is a 500 planes order. That's the biggest order ever in terms of number of planes. It doesn't change the short-term perspective on ramping up the production.
All our aircraft deliveries are delayed. The supply chain that was really decimated during COVID.
It's a real challenge for all the OEMs at the moment, but we absolutely have to have those aircraft delivered on time.
Nobody covers business like Bloomberg, your global business authority.
On the David Rubenstein Show, peer-to-peer conversations, I uncover the untold stories of the world's most successful leaders. Watch Wednesdays on Bloomberg Television.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
From the world of politics to the world of business. Every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, hosts Anne-Marie Hordern and Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live from Bloomberg's Washington headquarters. Get the latest from and about politics' biggest power players at the end of every trading day. Balance of Power, every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Having founded 3 iconic magazines from his bedroom in his mother's apartment, Sasha would guide Ego Trip into book publishing and television production. While creative differences would ultimately bring about the end of the group, Sasha's mix of insight, humor, and deep understanding of culture would beget his next move into the world of filmmaking. Initially, it's you, Elliot, and Mao, and then in 1996, Gabe Alvarez joins, and then in 1997, Brent Rollins joined. How did that happen?
Gabe was working at a magazine called Rap Pages in LA with Brent. They had a section called Underground Zine where they wrote about zines. And so me and Elliot were flying out to LA to do a Cypress Hill cover story. And we met Gabe. He interviewed us for the column in Rap Pages. And we just thought he was cool. And so at one point we're like, yo, dude, why don't you come out here and move to New York and work on a magazine? We had no money. I said, but yo, you can stay at my mom's house in Queens. You're good. My mom's good with it. And he's crazy enough to do it. So Gabe came out, moved to Astoria, Queens, and stayed in my bedroom. And soon after, I guess Brent followed suit. And then also, as I remember it, you reached out to us saying that you wanted an intern or something, right?
Yeah, I was finishing my senior year of high school, and I had to get an internship. And I sat there with all the rap magazines. My taste leaned in the indie way. And I looked at On the Go, and I looked at Ego Trip, and I was like, On the Go looks really pretty, but Ego Trip makes me laugh on every page. Like I live for every inside joke, everything you guys put in the folios and all that stuff. And I just called over and over for 2 weeks until somebody called me back. And that was how I got down. When Ego Trip started, how did the humor and that voice develop in the magazine?
I think if you really look at what we were doing Ego Trip with the ads, the internal ads, those are like early memes. I mean, humor to me is super important. Like, it's a sign of intelligence. If you have no sense of humor, I can't with you, you know. And I think all of us at Ego Trip have a sense of humor, and there's a level of diversity there. You know, Gabe Alvarez is Mexican from LA, and Brent's from LA, he's Black and Vietnamese, and Jeff Mao is, you know, Chinese from Massachusetts, and Elliot is Greek, Ecuadorian, and Black, and I'm African American and Haitian. So we covered a lot of ground, and there were a lot of things to laugh at. I mean, I think things are so up. If you can't laugh, you're really up. I would say race in my career in general has been a pretty consistent through line in terms of how I'm trying to communicate with people and have conversations with people. And so Ego Trip was the foundation for that. I think the most important idea I've ever had was to listen to the voice in my head. You're walking around all day, you're by yourself. Who are you talking to? Well, you're talking to someone who's in your head. And the thing about the person in your head, typically that voice or that individual has your best interests at hand. So I'm not saying the voice is right all the time, but most of the times in my life where I transitioned into something new or tried something different, it was because the voice told me to do it.
In 1998, you guys decide that you are done with publishing a bi-monthly magazine. What was the sort of catalyst for that?
Well, we started doing these books. We did the book of rap lists, which has lots of fun facts about hip hop and music and records, and people seem to dig that. And we were thinking about what was next, but we had this idea to do a book about racism. So then from there, we did the big book of racism. Someone at VH1 gives it to a woman named Christina Norman, who's a big cheese.
Yes.
She likes the book. She then gives it out to a bunch of her staff. And someone says, hey, we should do a television show with these guys. So VH1 reaches out to us, and we did a show called TV's Illest Minority Moments, presented by Ego Trip. And so we just looked at the roles people of color have played on television over the years. That did okay. So let's do more. So then we came up with a series called Race-O-Rama, which is another exploration into race, 3-part series.
You mentioned politics and race humor was very central to sort of the latter half of Ego Trip as a magazine, and then obviously was the sort of core premise of the Big Book of Racism. Were people wrapping their heads around the satire and the commentary that you were providing?
Some people didn't get it. We have a section in the book called the Yellow Pages, right? And it's about Asian culture. Now, mind you, Jeff Mao is Chinese, Brent Rollins is half Vietnamese. They're leading the charge in some of these jokes or whatever we're exploring. But the Asian woman who worked the publisher was like, I refuse to work on this. This is not cool. So it's like where we are now, like comedians can't do shit. Like, imagine if that book came out now, it would be crazy. We're all very so sensitive, and I think sensitivity is good, but I think there needs to be balance. Like, people are too precious now. It's like, if you can't have a good racial joke with your white friend or your black friend or anyone, then we're And those jokes are good only when you understand what. It's like, if I make a joke about white people, I'm like, yeah, white people, they can't, whatever, they can't rap. It's like, no, white people can rap. That's not funny. If you make a joke about a white person who likes the Smiths, and there are little nuances in there that you know, and only a Smiths fan will know, that person will laugh. It's like, oh, shit, black dude knows his shit, right? And for me, it's always been communication. It's like, when you like all these diverse sorts of things, it's communication, it's intelligence. It gives you information that you need to survive and communicate and to make shit. And I think a lot of that is lost now. How do you process criticism? Well, I was once a critic myself, and so I come into it with a bit of an understanding of where people might be coming from, and sometimes people are coming from places that are personal to them, and sometimes their biases bleed into it, so you've got to take it with a grain of salt. If you're someone who makes art that is in the public eye, you have to be willing to accept that the public might not like it, or someone in the public might not like it, but you got to just stick with what your message is. And as long as you believe in what you're doing, that's all that matters. I did a series recently called Everything's Gonna Be All White. It's on Showtime. It's about race in America from the perspective of not just black people, but people of color. And I got barbecued by everybody, including black people, based on a trailer that they saw. They didn't even see the series. At first, I was a little hurt, I guess. So like, damn, I'm on some shit, trying to like make some change. But then you realize like, yo, people don't like your shit. As long as you like your shit and you stick with your shit, take a shit.
So you and Ego Trip do a series of shows that are race focused, and then this births another piece of content that you made that I think was years ahead of its time, the White Rapper Show.
Yeah.
What inspired you guys to make that, and how did you get it sold through?
One Christmas, we're meeting with an executive from a guy named Jim Ackerman at VH1. He took us out for drinks. Like, hey, you know, Race and Rama did great. What's next? What do you want to do? We're knocking them back. And I'm drunk, and I'm like, yo, we should do a show called The White House. We make white people move into a house and rap. And he looked at me and said, that's a brilliant idea. And
the show rated well, and
the show was a blockbuster. I mean, the ratings that they got then on that show, if a show got that now, I would be Dave Chappelle right now.
And that led to you guys doing the Miss Rap Supreme.
Yeah, but what happened was, White Rapper Show did well. New president of the company came in and said, you gotta do something that caters more towards women.
Instead of following up the hit with the sequel, you guys are tasked with figuring out a way to broaden the audience and particularly to court a female viewership.
Yep.
Which is a challenge in anything rap related.
Why would you think that a show about women in rap would do well when women in rap in real life don't do well? Now, the tables have turned. Women are killing it now. They're the I'm glad it finally happened, but back then, a show about women rappers wasn't going to be a big deal. But even those ratings, compared to now, like, people would kill for those ratings, but they just weren't good enough for another season.
When that comes to a close, it sort of ends the chapter of Ego Trip, and you guys never really collaborated again after that.
Right.
What happened?
The finale of the show, the last battle, we're in LA. They rented us a house up in Mulholland, like a fucking bawling out of control house. So we were all staying there, and the show wraps, everyone's hugging, people are popping bottles, we're all there. Then we turn around, yo, where's Elliot? I don't know. We go back to the house, everything, he bounced, he's just gone. Like, oh shit, what the f happened? I don't know, I met with Elliot, and he was like, I'm not feeling it anymore. And that's his prerogative, and he has his reasons, and I think ultimately he did what was best for him, which is all that matters. At that point, I was like, okay, guys, let's keep going, let's keep doing this. And at a certain point, Ego Trip is like the Flintstones car, right? Like, there's no engine, it's his feet. If all the feet aren't going in the same direction, they ain't gonna move. So I think that different guys had different perspectives on what they wanted to do. So at that point, I said, well, I gotta keep on trucking. So I became a partner at a company called Roadside, and we launched a production company called Automatic Films. We did a series about a black skateboarder for BET called Being Terry Kennedy. So then I moved on. I moved on to continue to do film and television after that. How do you know when to pivot? My rule is when I can no longer learn and I can no longer teach anyone anything new, it's time to move on. It's time to try something new. Time to get scared a little bit. If you're not scared a little bit, then what are you doing?
You go to Roadside and make your first television projects as a soloist.
Yep. We did a documentary for VH1 called The Origin of Me. We brought 50 Cent down to South Carolina, where he learned about his ancestry. His great aunt still lived there. We found the plantation where his family worked, and the same family owned the house. But working on that doc, I had the opportunity to direct for the first time. We were in this museum for an organization called the Red Shirts. The Red Shirts were the proto-Klan. Before the Klan, they were the Red Shirts, right? So there's this museum that's a tribute to the Red Shirts, right? So we go to the museum and like Ron, the director, I don't know, he had a brain fart or he wasn't feeling it. He's like, go ahead, just go do it. In that moment, I had the opportunity to direct 50 and I was like, I can do this. This woman who was the curator of the museum or ran the museum was literally telling 50 Cent with a straight face that the slaves who worked here were happy. And so I said to 50 Cent, ask her, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that, ma'am? Well, because we knew them. Like, well, you're old lady, you're old as shit, but you're not old enough to know a slave, right? That doc really opened my eyes to what was possible. I mean, not that I had always been working towards that, always wanted to be a director or a writer or whatever, but like that moment just opened doors for me in my mind. I'm not traditionally educated. You know, everything I've ever done, I've learned on the job. One of my best friends besides history is failure. Failure is your best friend. And if you're afraid to fail, you'll never succeed.
While you guys were working on those books, you started sort of a side project endeavor by linking up with Pat and Adrian from Mass Appeal. And that's sort of the beginning of this whole other part of your career that has really dominated the last like 10 to 15 years. How did that happen?
Well, coming off of doing one of the first graffiti zines, at that point, there were way more zines happening. Mass Appeal was a zine that just kept getting better and better, and I spent money on it. Like, I liked it. And one day I just called them up. I got the voicemail, and I said, listen, you don't know who I am, but I love your magazine. It's great to see the evolution. The photography's great. Keep going. That's it. I was a fan. I spent the money. I had no expectations. And they called me back and said, yeah, we know you already want to hire you. I was like, nah, you can't afford me, but keep going. Keep doing it. So they kept going. They kept doing it. And I think they got to a point where they had money. They approached me again. They said, hey, man, what's up with you getting down with us now? And I said, you know what? I have an idea. I'll be the editorial director as an old-ass man, and I have a young man who I think could do a great job, and that person wound up being you.
Yes.
So I came on as the editorial director. Noah Callahan-Bever was the editor-in-chief. I liked Mass Appeal. I liked how it integrated all the things that I was interested in like graffiti and like fashion and music, and like it wasn't one thing. And I, again, connecting with my initial idea with Ego Trip, how the world was expanding and people like me weren't so weird anymore.
Mass Appeal starts to really grow as a magazine for several years. You know, obviously the passing of Pat was, I think, a pretty monumental setback both for the business and also for Adrian and for everyone emotionally.
I mean, I think about Pat now, I just laugh to myself because he's such a unique guy, funny guy. He was a good dude, and when he passed away, tragically, it just changed the game. I think for Adrian, it changed the game, a lot of stress, and magazines were starting to be in decline in terms of just people buying them, distribution. It was the game was changing. So I think it was 2008 when Mass Appeal shut down the magazine. So it was just time.
At what point did you become a partner in Mass Appeal? Was that part of the relationship with Pat and Adrian, or did that happen afterward?
Well, I was a partner with Pat and Adrian, the magazine, and then the magazine died. And so when I joined Decon, I became a partner at Decon. And then when we started Mass Appeal, then I was a partner at Mass Appeal. Yeah, new company, new everything.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So Philip Leeds, who worked for Pharrell for many years, is a old friend of mine. And so I was talking to Philip, and we were talking about starting a creative agency. And he says, we should meet my friend Peter Binbender. He's got a company called Decon. So we go down and meet Peter, and he's like, I know who you are. You guys have a great idea, but I got you by 5 years. Sasha, why don't you come up here? Why don't you become a partner at Decon? So I was like, all right, worked it out. Came over to Decon, and about 6 months into it, I thought about Vice and all the things Vice were doing. I remember when the Vice guys used to write to us. The Vice guys were huge fans of Ego Trip and Mass Appeal, right? They won't tell you that now, but I've got letters, they called us. So I was like, wow, look what Vice has done. They killing it. You know, got to respect that. Why can't we do the same thing? I spoke with Peter, and Peter's like, well, let's just bring Mass Appeal back. So I spoke to Adrian and got his blessing. He was happy to see it, what he had started with Pat to continue to live on.
And how did you guys end up getting Nas involved?
You know, Peter and Nas had a bunch of interactions over the years, and Peter was constantly talking to Nas about what we were doing and stuff. And Nas signed up and has been a very important part of the credibility. I remember having a serious meeting with Lucian in Universal. That was a lesson in learning how deep people's relationships are in the game. Here I was with Peter and Nas meeting with Lucian about like doing this deal with them, investing in us, and like we have this big conversation, and Lucian leaves the room, like we're like looking at each other, like eating and like what's gonna happen? They come back like we're gonna do this deal. Coming from where I've come from in terms of doing magazines in my bedroom to like having people wanting to invest millions and investing millions of dollars in the company was super exciting.
Can you believe it's summer already? That means it's time for the Boston Pops Fireworks Spectacular, and Bloomberg will make sure you see all the fireworks, music, and special appearances by pop superstars En Vogue, chart-topping country duo Low Cash, and film, TV, and Broadway powerhouse Mandy Gonzalez, plus the U.S. Army Field Band and the cast of the Broadway musical Ragtime. It all starts tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern right here on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
You're so intimately linked to the future of the UK. What are you seeing when you go to branches and in the country?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of anxiety at the moment. You know, I think the recovery from the pandemic has been and is continuing to be very strong. So I think we're seeing the economy recover. But with rising interest rates, with inflation, those are things that, you know, peoples and families and businesses haven't had to deal with for 10 years. So a lot of business owners today haven't had to operate in that environment. So it's causing quite a lot of anxiety, which means, you know, for us, because we're up and down the country in branches and offices, we can spend a lot of time talking to businesses and helping them plan and deal with it. But it is, you know, it's very different, and it's not something people have had to operate in for a long time.
Today's CFOs are reshaping the C-suite, positioning companies to meet the next generation of challenges, breaking out of traditional roles.
One of the most important things is looking around the corner.
Look for Chief Future Officer on Bloomberg. When U.S. jobs numbers are released, Bloomberg brings you crucial data at terminal speed and instant expert analysis. Nobody covers jobs day like Bloomberg. Lots happening on Wall Street.
There are so many factors at play today.
It remains tight in certain parts of the economy.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insight.
Crisis is too strong a word, and words like that get used a lot.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
America's economy needs a diversity of institutions.
That's something that Wall Street pays a lot of attention to.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week, live Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
In the ensuing years, Sasha's restless curiosity would lead him to projects on subjects as varied as Wu-Tang Clan, the LA riots, and Louis Armstrong, all told with his singular understanding of culture and race and their impact on history. Sasha would also see the successful completion of a deeply personal passion project, the theatrical release of Cane River, his father's feature opus, which was lost to time in the aftermath of his unexpected death in the early 80s.
To me, your piece de resistance at Mass Appeal is Of Mics and Men, which is a tremendous achievement in filmmaking on any and every level, but particularly if you know the intricacies of how Wu-Tang works. How did you manage to wrangle that situation and also to produce such a magnificent product at the end of the day?
Well, my agent called Mass Appeal. He was working with RZA, and he was like, they're looking for a director. Do you want to throw your hat in the ring? I was like, hell yeah. And I knew RZA a little bit from Beat Down and being in the game. We had many friends in common. This guy, Mike McDonald, who's a graffiti writer.
And he was their original manager, right?
Yeah. When you throw names around like Mike McDonald, they know that you know what you're talking about, right? So throw around Mike's name and other people's names, and, you know, I had a conversation with RZA, and he said, you know, Ron Howard wants to do this film, right? And I said, look, love Ron Howard, he's great, but he ain't gonna do what I'm gonna do. It's just not possible. You know, I'm of this shit. I was there. When Mike McDonald was promoting Protect Your Neck, we would go out together promoting Beat Down and Protect Your Neck at record shops. Like, we were hand in hand, going hand to hand with people with product. I'm like, yo, this is in my DNA. The skit on the album where the radio host is like, oh, you want to hear that Wu-Tang again and again? That was at City College. And I went to City College, and I was there when that call came in. I was cutting class when that call came in. So I'm like, yo, dude, I'm your guy for this. Like, I'll kill it. It'll be great. Trust me. So fly back the same day and got the call like RZA says, you're good. Do I ever get creatively blocked? Yes, it happens. And you just need quiet time. Sometimes you just have to be alone with yourself and alone with your ideas. If you try to force your ideas, it's not gonna work. If you have a block, you just have to slow down, reset, chill out, listen to that voice. Once again, the voice in your head is there to help you.
After doing Of Mice and Men, you started working on an incredibly personal project that I think sort of is a full circle moment in your career, which is getting involved in helping to facilitate the release of your father's feature film that he directed, you know, in the, I guess, months or year before he passed.
Right.
How did that happen?
So my dad was mainly a documentary filmmaker, but ultimately he wanted to make feature films. So he raised the money from one of the richest black families in New Orleans, the Rhodes family. They are in the mortuary sciences. They own funeral homes. Anyone black has been buried by the Rhodes family in New Orleans. So they got behind the film. Before he died, he was close to getting distribution for it. Richard Pryor really wanted to help get it out there, but the patriarch of the Rhodes family did not want to lose control, so he kind of vetoed it. Then my dad died. And then we go to the funeral, and people are like, we're gonna pay for your college, and the film is gonna do, and then like, nothing happened for years. So, I don't know, 6 years ago, I Googled my dad randomly. And I find an article in the Times about a place called Indie Collect, and they're an organization that works with orphan films that are just out there and no one knows much about them. And this place, Do Art, where they process all the film, had storage of all these films, and they were getting rid of it. They were shutting that floor down. They need to get rid of all these films. And so the Indie Collect people stumbled upon my dad's film, Cane River, and it was in the article. I reached out to Indie Collect and say, I'm the son of Horace Jenkins III, and I'm a filmmaker. Like, let's connect. So I met with them, and they did a great job in sort of getting it to where it was. And I said, we've got to look at distribution. They recommended folks, and then Adam Yauch's company, Oscilloscope, was interested. And when I heard that, I mean, Adam Yauch I considered him a friend. I knew him, and obviously he passed away, but the fact that they were interested in distributing my dad's film, I was like, this is coming from the great beyond. And so the film came out like 2 weeks before COVID. It was released in theaters, and then COVID hit. So if it would have come 2 weeks later, it wouldn't have had its theatrical debut. So my dad's film finally made it to theaters.
That's amazing.
So, and now it's on the Criterion Channel, and it's out there, so people dig it. For me, every shot matters. Like, who knows how much longer I'll be getting these shots. And the shots have been getting better and better, and I'm thankful, but like, I operate under the understanding of like, tomorrow's not promised, opportunity's not promised, so every opportunity I have to try to maximize.
After doing that, during COVID, I know you started working on the Louis Armstrong documentary that came out this spring.
Yep.
How did his story land on your radar, and how did you wrap your head around, pursuing this project?
The nice people at Imagine Entertainment reached out to me about it, and I was honest. I was like, of course I know what everyone else knows, but I'm not super deep into Louis Armstrong. They're like, well, we did 2 years of research, check all this stuff out. And when I saw the research, and when I learned about the tapes that he made at his house, like just talking shit, Louis Armstrong, that motherfucker was hip hop, like a motherfucker. You hear him talk, like you have this squeaky clean image of like Louis Armstrong being this classy guy, and not that he wasn't classy, but like he's a regular motherfucker who like talked that shit. And the guy has a very powerful presence. I mean, his house in Queens is a museum. It's as he left it. I mean, obviously it's taken some things out, but his wife's nightgown is still on the bed. I mean, it's just like insane. And there's this room that was his favorite room. And that room was where he had his reel-to-reels and where he listened to music. And so they know the last song that he listened to before he died, and they had the actual record, and we had the actual turntable. So we shot the reel-to-reels moving, right? They fixed them to get them to work. So we're like, all right, we're gonna plug in the turntable and get the thing to work. And so we plugged in the turntable, it wouldn't work. Kept trying, it wouldn't work. They unplugged it, they spun it, the record started playing. There's 7 or 8 people who were in the room with me. It's like, no bullshit. Like, the guy is real and present. And I was like, okay, this guy, I feel like he approves of what's going on. I'm just gonna roll with it.
That's crazy.
It happened with Biz Markie. So I've just finished a Biz Markie film. And we're in Red Hook, Brooklyn at the sound stage, scouting the sound stage. I was talking about making a Biz Markie cereal, like a cereal box or like, for the set, like, Biz Markie with a gold chain or whatever. Someone tapped me on my shoulder, like, look over there. There's a homeless man with a shirt off with a gold chain. Fat dookie rope. Like, when do you ever see homeless people with gold chains? These things come from like elsewhere, and I just roll with it.
With both those projects, you're dealing with a protagonist who is no longer with us. And obviously, in both instances, there's a depth of archival footage. But as a filmmaker, how does that change your approach to the storytelling and crafting the narrative?
Thankfully, in the case of Rick James and Armstrong and Biz, there's a wealth of like, they're in their own word stuff out there, right? And so once you get familiar with their in their own word stuff, you start to paint a picture of who you think they are. And once you have that picture, based on what seems to sync up with what you believe, based on what you hear, then it becomes much easier to sort of craft something that feels like them. You talk to people who knew him, you talk to people who you don't expect. It's always the unexpected. And so when you interview Rakim, you go back to his high school, and he tells you, I met him in this lunchroom, and he just, everyone tells the story about how they met Biz in their lunchrooms, but he didn't go to their school. That was his hustle, lunchrooms, right? So you learn this stuff, and you're with Rakim at his old high school, and he's sitting there, and you ask him that question, as an interviewer. So where were you when you heard he passed away? And he just like starts wailing, right? Like, he says, right here is where I went. And I just got chills. Like, and he's not like, cut off the cameras and he was having like a vulnerable moment, like, because he was in his pain. I was like, I had the idea to go back to the high school, but I had no idea that it was going to be this. And like, when do you ever see men, but black men in general, crying on camera? It's those moments that make you feel like you're connecting with people in ways that like have value.
What are the qualities about yourself that you hold on to the most tightly?
I think it's most important to hold on to who you are. Honestly, I didn't figure out who I was until a couple of years ago, and it feels good to really understand and fully realize who you are. That's powerful, but it takes a while. And so for me, holding on to who you are and understanding who you are, or going on that mission to figure out who you are is the most important thing.
I know that recently you decided to step down from Mass Appeal as an active participant. Obviously, you remain a partner and invested in their continued success and growth. What animated that decision?
A real desire to focus on directing and doing something that's a little bit more boutique and not, 40 employees and all that goes with that. I feel like I'm in a stride now with my directing where I'm getting these opportunities. And you're not going to be here forever. I'm getting into my twilight years and the filmmaking is evolving. It's getting better, right? So while I have this opportunity to focus on that, I want to do that. I think with Resurgent Pictures, which is myself, and Markel Cepedo, who's my wife, who's a filmmaker. I think the stuff that we want to do is a little bit more broad. I got to tell the Wu-Tang story. I got to tell the Biz Markie story. I did a film about people who write lyrics, like the new generation of kids or people can tell those stories. But I also feel like hip hop is a marker in time. I don't believe, especially with black music, there are no genres. Jazz. Louis Armstrong caught a gun charge at 14. RZA's mother ran numbers. So did Rick James's mother. It's the same story over and over again. It's a reflection of and reaction to the environment. Hip hop and jazz and blues, it's the same shit. It's the same people going through the same shit with the same result. So with that sort of mindset, it's how I approach these films. Having the privilege to make films about black artists from different generations, not many people have had that privilege, but I realize that access to information has led me to understand what I believe today is it's no genres. It's the same story over and over again.
Why does everybody want to be a consultant, and what are all these consultants doing?
Well, David, I think that we actually defy the label consultant because sometimes consultant seems to imply that we only give advice. And when you look at what Accenture does, we're really different than the traditional version of a consultant. We're really about relevance and results, and that's what is driving our business.
What about a consulting project? In my example, I'm the CEO, I have a problem, I call you up, I say, solve my problem or give me a solution.
We don't operate as big companies permanently in crisis mode. And so when you think about how long does it solve things, a lot of it starts with, the company being willing to set aggressive goals. And so what we are trying to do now is work with our clients to work differently and to work faster.
Business Week Radio, live weekday afternoons at 3 p.m. Eastern.
We got a little bit of talking.
Come on, are you guys ready?
Harnessing the power of Bloomberg Business Week, Carol Masser and Tim Stanovic bring you the latest news from the worlds of business, technology, politics, and more.
How does the Fed play into this and what the Fed does potentially?
This is so exhausting and this is so all-encompassing.
Listen on Bloomberg Radio and streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals.
BSO Now is your online home for weekly Boston Symphony Orchestra and Boston Pops performances. See new concerts that go behind the scenes, plus acclaimed archival concerts. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsor, Bank of America.
Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Steve's ability on the course may not be etched into any record books, but following him around, it's clear that it's not for lack of trying.
Jeez.
We were constantly hustling behind him as he caught up with executives in the portfolio companies and reminisced with former and current players.
He's a day trader. He taught himself
self-made day trader. Yeah. And so he's on the bus after a game in New England, and he's day trading on the bus, and Bill Belichick sees him and cuts him on the spot. You know, in many ways, it's a convention, right, of the people that I don't see maybe once a year. And so it's kind of all come together. My firm, our charity, fundraising efforts, and then the friends that are around. My dad and my brother, it all happens right there as a confluence of all these parts of my life that have found its common center.
I wrote and recorded my first 2 songs, and it was like my world lit up, and there was no turning back.
In 1995, a 12-year-old with a diary in Snow Hill, North Carolina, had an idea. Marlena Evans adopted the name Rhapsody and combined the need for self-expression with a love for hip-hop music to become one of the most respected MCs in rap. After nearly a decade spent in the trenches of hip-hop's underground, Rhapsody broke out with a guest appearance on Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly and seized upon the opportunity, following up the spotlight moment with her Grammy-nominated opus, Layla's Wisdom. She continues to up the ante creatively with each project, promising her forthcoming 2023 album will be her most revealed work to date. And it all started with one idea.
How did your parents' professional life inform your career ambitions?
My mom and dad, they were both, factory workers. My dad was a mechanic at DuPont, and my mom, she would paint china on plates at a company called Lennox. The thing I learned from them is that anything you want in life, you have to work for and work hard for. We didn't have everything or the best everything, but I didn't go without either. So, I was always comfortable, but one thing I always saw them do was work hard.
You're the 4th of 5 siblings, correct?
Yes.
How do you feel like that dynamic shaped your experience and your outlook on the world?
Growing up, with siblings, you learn how to just fit in everything. Like even in rap, I think that's part of maybe where my humility comes from, where it's like, I don't need to boast out here that I'm the best. Like, it's cool. Like, I know how to share the space. I'm used to sharing the space. I'm one of 5. That shaped my outlook on the world. I was the last girl of the family. Everybody around my age were boys. I was a tomboy, but my mom would only let me hang out with the boys so much. So, I spent a lot of time by myself. That's probably where the love for like reading and writing and being creative came from. You kind of have to entertain yourself and sit in your own thoughts.
Was there anybody in your family or sort of immediate circle that worked in a creative field?
No. And I think that's one reason why I felt like I got started late. I always knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be creative. I wanted to do music from a young age, but I didn't have any example of that. Nobody was performing in Snow Hill. I didn't go to my first concert till I was in middle school, and I had to drive an hour to do that. And I didn't go to my first local shows to college. So, those things made me feel like it wasn't possible. I don't even know how to start. And even expressing your dreams, like, I would never tell people, my family, what I wanted to do in real life, because I was like, they were like, what? Why you want to rap? You can't rap. Like, who taught you how to rap? How you gonna make money off rap? Like, I don't know either. I don't even know how to explain that to you. So it was just something that I always kept tucked inside until I got around the right people that helped to bring it out. The most important idea I've had is to think that it's possible. Anything that you set out to do, you can accomplish. Whatever fuels us, whatever comes to our imagination, to think that I can do it.
What was it about the nature of rap music in particular that was so captivating?
Let's say MC Light, for example, you know, to be a young girl, but to see this woman in New York and she's got the hat on, cocked to the side and the baggy pants, and I'm just like, yo, that's fly. And it gave you a space just to be and just to create with whatever. That's how I looked at it. The storytelling, the creativity, like, you know, what you can do with words. I just thought it was just all so cool, and it was so different from what I was experiencing in Snow Hill. I look outside of my window growing up, and it's a tobacco field and woods, and it's super quiet. And to turn on the TV and see these crews on the block, and you know how they wear their clothes and the shoes are not tied up, and I'm like, oh, I like how that fits, you know. It was just something that I was so connected to, in individuality and the creativity, and then just like taking something and shaping it to how you want to shape it.
When did you start expressing yourself through music and realizing that you had these feelings and these things that you wanted to articulate in that way?
It started in middle school. Like, I grew up in, you know, I would say the typical home, you know, you have a baby boomer parent. They grew up where you do what I say, like, don't question anything. And there wasn't necessarily room to communicate your thoughts, your feelings, you know. So if I wanted to express something to my mom, I would write it in a letter. Or, you know, if I wanted to express myself, I got what we call a journal, of course, a diary. And, you know, I would write poems. Because, you know, I didn't grow up in a home where I felt comfortable enough, like, oh, I like this boy, let me talk to you about it. Or I feel this way about this, you know. So I held everything inside, but it had to come out, right? Because you weren't going to buck up at your parents, so you had to let the energy out some way.
At what point did that start to transition into a more lyrical direction?
Just starting with the diary, allowing yourself to see your thoughts written out. That's the beginning, right? The next phase of that was going from poetry to spoken word. So I went to college and I started watching Def Poetry Jam, you know, Russell Simmons and Mos Def, and I was like, yo, this is ill, right? So while I was in college, just getting around people that, you know, were break dancers, rappers, and they were like, you know, what you do? And I'm like, well, I'm gonna do the spoken word piece. Then, you know, getting comfortable in a musical setting, those friends that I was with, you know, that were performing and, you know, that had started this club with me and we were hosting rap battles. They went to the studio one day and they said, we were gonna do a mixtape, right? And I would just go hang out and observe, knowing that I wanted to be a part of it. And my best friend at the time, whose name is Charlie Smarts, he sat down beside me and he was like, I know you be writing raps, you know, by yourself. Like, won't you stop being scared and just get in the booth? Like, nobody's gonna judge you. We'll help you. I wrote and recorded my first 2 songs, and it was like my world lit up. And there was no turning back. Like, I started skipping class. I would drive to school and just park and get ready to go into class, but I would start writing in the car. That started like around the summer 2005. Success to me is anything that brings you joy and makes you feel complete and is purposeful to you. Everybody's gonna define that differently. So, you know, you have to ask yourself, what's gonna fulfill me?
In that period that you are starting to create and you're making these first songs, it's a period in hip-hop where there's very limited bandwidth in terms of success. What were you looking at in terms of your path? What was your plan around sustaining yourself?
I wanted the platinum plaques, I wanted the radio hits, right? But I wanted them how I knew them when I grew up, you know, watching Lauryn Hill get all those Grammys, seeing Queen Latifah's success, you know, with UNITY. There was still this belief in me, like, nah, there's still space for this. Somebody has to want this, you know, somebody has to fill this space. And I think I just never let go of that idea that it was possible. I was also mentally prepared because of Ninth Wonder and Guru. They prepare me and like, yo, the path that you want to take in this day and time, for you to even break ground, it's going to take you 7 to 10 years. I remember he telling me that, and I was like, I'm going to be how old? You know, like, but it's like, all right, let's go.
How did you sustain yourself during those first, 5 years?
I sacrificed, at a time when I was in college and a lot of people were going to spring break and you're going to parties and all this. I would go to work, I would get off work and go to the studio every single day, every day. There was even a point where I got sick and I got diagnosed with Graves' disease, and I took some time off work, but I did not take time off music, and I was staying with my sister at the time. She was like, if you go to the studio, you could go to work. And she kicked me out, and I was just so broke. And I think it was, when my mom really understood like where my heart was. My mom came in one night and she said, I see what you want to do. She was like, I believe in you and I'm going to help you. My parents weren't the richest, but they worked hard and they made great decisions with their money. So this was a time like, I didn't have anywhere to stay when I went to Raleigh, so I would sleep in the studio a lot. They found like a foreclosed home and they got me a nice little home. And that's just how I got through. But, figuring it out, getting family support, leaning on friends, like you realize it really takes a village. When it comes to doubt, I'm human, so I definitely do doubt myself. But I think the important thing that comes with doubt is awareness. I can say, okay, you're feeling this way, now why do you feel this way? One thing I've learned, especially in these last 2 years, is that you're always in charge of the experience that you want to have in this world. You get to decide, I'm gonna feel good today. I choose not to let this bother me.
In the middle of this, you are dealt this incredible curveball of Graves' disease, which is physically debilitating and also, impacts how you look, which as you are developing yourself as an artist and as a brand is, I imagine, very challenging to cope with emotionally, mentally. How did you wrap your head around that and reconcile your own feelings?
The hardest thing I think with that was the challenge of the physical appearance. Because we live in a space where it's only 10% about the music. People have to see you first before they hear you. And then you get in this space and my physical changes, right? I go from, before I got diagnosed with Graves' disease, I was hyperactive. So I didn't even know what was going on, but I lost mad weight. Like I got down to like 105, 110. And then my eyes, they had bulged so much. They like they was coming out of my head, and I had this big goiter. And then, you go through the treatments, and the treatments take you from hyper to hypo, right? And I'm a super energetic person, but now I'm like trying to figure out how to level out. And I don't have the energy anymore. Now I'm gaining weight crazy. My metabolism's so low, and it's just like, yo, I look crazy, right? And then you couple that with the internet, which is not a kind place, and especially to be a woman in hip-hop. You got all these things thrown at you. That took a real toll on my self-confidence and how I saw myself. A lot of days I cried. A lot of days it's just like, damn. But, I just come from a family that they don't let you do that. So I might have my moment, but I'm going to always bounce back on some it. It just is what it is. And so I poured everything into the music because one thing Knife always told me is people cannot deny good music.
What are the qualities about yourself that you hold on to the most tightly?
My heart and my humility. Just to approach everybody with love. And that's something I never, ever want to lose about myself, is always approaching people and seeing the good in them. And humility, no ego. So yeah, those are the things that keep me grounded, that bring me peace, that keep good people around me.
Were there moments that your confidence was shaken? Did you think about pivoting or doing something different at any point?
Never. Like, I'm an 80s baby, so I grew up in the 90s, and 90s have a huge influence on me. And one thing I never liked, and what I respected about this 90s, they didn't want about that biting. It was all about being an individual. So even if I saw people, you know, being successful at doing this and other people having cookie-cutter versions of it, I never really respected that. It was always me trying to figure out, like, yo, what's wrong with people? Like, when did we become sheep? Why is there no room for balance? You telling me everybody want this? Like, y'all not bored with the same narrative? Is this all women can look like in hip-hop? That's not the culture that I know.
London will stay a financial center. It will stay our EMEA hub. We'll just have a rebalancing onto the continent. And actually, the numbers of who has moved across aren't that big. So it's sort of in the 200 level. And if you think about 15,000 people, that's sort of not that material. And so I do think both will basically continue to grow and continue to be very relevant. What will change, though, and the big thing that's changing, is actually the risk-taking is what's going to move. And so we've historically had risk-taking in the UK. That risk-taking and the assets that go with it, not the people alone, but the assets that go with it, that's the next phase of what we're now moving into. And that will be a material change.
News breaks. No one covers the world like Bloomberg.
The image of Vladimir Putin as the all-powerful leader has been rattled already.
History was made here at the federal courthouse in Miami when Donald Trump became the first ever former president to ever be arraigned on federal charges.
We're going to need a new engine technology, and that's where the real battle lies. And whoever makes that decision first is going to have a huge impact on this industry.
Bloomberg, your global business authority. For news and analysis covering the biggest challenges facing the UK government, economy, financial services and markets.
Tax cuts should not be the priority. It's about a credible plan for growth over the next 2-3 years.
In this post-Brexit world, how do you see actually servicing your clients?
It was disruptive, and it's going to have implications to how capital raising works.
Now we're having the perfect storm in the UK.
Watch Francine Lacqua Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Struggling with an unexpected health crisis and a mainstream music industry unable to fully grasp her talents, Rhapsody nonetheless continued to hone her craft. She stayed in the studio and created a series of renowned mixtapes that culminated in her critically acclaimed debut in 2012. This dedication paid off a couple years later in the form of a high-profile guest appearance that would set the stage for her Grammy-nominated sophomore album, Layla's Wisdom. Rap is, on the one hand, about self-expression and personal revelation. On the other hand, it is a pugilistic, competitive sport. How do you, as a very humble and thoughtful person, balance those two elements?
Anything I'm good at, I'm competitive. When it came to basketball, I was a dog. Like, I would come up and hit the floor. I was talking smack. Rap humbled me. Like, this is one thing, like, it don't come as fast and as natural. But at the same time, I still had that competitive spirit, and I still wanted to be one of the best and compete with the best. I'm happy that it didn't come easy to me because it allowed me to have that humility, but at the same time, I am a natural competitor. Thinking about the era that I came up in, I came up with some dogs, like Kendrick Lamar, Ab Soul, Nipsey, J. Cole, Freddie Gibbs, Big Crit. Like, these are my peers. So it's like, yo, what you gonna do? You know, you want to be the best. This is your competition right here. How you showing up? And two, I grew up with boys. So the fact that they were boys didn't scare me. I knew how to rock with boys. I played ball with boys. We would get out of the girls' practice and I would stay in practice with the varsity boys. So I was already conditioned to be like, I don't care what gender you are. That don't mean nothing to me. It was the same thing in rap. The boys respected me, but they also helped me get better too.
I don't believe in writer's block. To me, it's your mind telling you need to go be inspired by something. Whether it's, you spend a day with friends, you take a trip, you watch a movie. It's just time to go step out and live a little bit and then come back.
Tell me about your process of evolution. You talked about Ninth challenging you and pushing you. What were the inflection points where you're sort of unlocking your own personal style?
I'm laughing because it came in spurts, right? And when you said Knife challenge you, I just remember Murs coming down to record, and he would watch me record, and he'd look at Knife, he's like, bro, why are you so hard on her? Like, it could be an ad-lib or whatever. He made me do it 20 times till I got it right. Knife knew I had to be tough to make it. But it always came in spurts. It was never consistent. And I would always kind of revert back to, what was comfortable for me. And I think, even part of that came from feeling like, you gotta be the best. You gotta be so intricate and the cadence gotta be crazy. And it's just like, yo, relax, bro. Like, relax. You don't have to have this super crazy cadence and these super deep metaphors. Like, being ill is a lot broader than what you think.
I process criticism in a few ways. I like to sit with the criticism and ask myself, where is it coming from? I take it and I think about it and I'm like, okay, how can I grow from this situation? How can I learn from this criticism?
What year did you feel like you were really a player in the space?
I can say To Pimp a Butterfly opened the door. I felt like I was never in a place for people to even hear me, to even be able to form an opinion of what they felt. So Kendrick put me on that album, allowed for there to be a light on me, for people to be like, oh, okay, who is this? She's on Kendrick's album, his sophomore album, one of the most anticipated albums to ever come out. Let me stop and give her my ear, right? So that was
this
the
is
beginning.
After a decade of
a decade.
Making music.
Yeah. When Kendrick first came to the studio, I want to say it was like 2011, I was there. We didn't even talk about music. We joked, told stories, went to cookout and got food. Just being there and beginning the relationship, that set me up to be in that position. And sometimes I do this a lot. I sit and I stop, and I'm like, damn, if he didn't give you that opportunity, where would you be now?
You get this look onto Pimp a Butterfly, and your life changes essentially overnight. The opportunities that are being, afforded you are wildly different. And there's a new level of sort of scrutiny and expectation. Going into Layla's Wisdom, how did that change your thinking about what you wanted to achieve artistically and your process?
Under Knife's guidance, he never let me get too in my head about expectations in that way. Even when Kendrick hit me to do the verse, I didn't hear what he did on the project. All he sent me was the instrumental. So I could have really gotten in my head about that. And Knife always reminded me is he hit you to do you. So just do you. Don't overthink it. And so when I'm going into Layla's Wisdom, you approach it the same way. Just do you. Don't overthink it.
My biggest advantage as a creator is being myself. So I'm always gonna bring my unique perspective. nobody else can be you. I think that's your greatest superpower.
So whether we're talking about Layla's Wisdom or Eve, both projects are fairly high concept. What is the process from sitting down to write song number one to this high concept coming into focus?
Every album has been different. Layla's Wisdom, I worked on that one about 1.5 years, 2 years. I recorded maybe 80, 90 songs for that. I was just getting in the studio and just making songs, right? With no real clear-cut direction or anything. It was just like, what do I want to talk about? How do I feel? And then, you know, Ninth comes in and we go through songs and it's like these collections of songs sound good together. And then it was like, what's the concept and what's the title? I did those last. I'm like, yo, how am I gonna make this make sense, right? To me, I felt like that album at that time was just about wisdom and giving people their flowers, right? And I was like, yeah, that's what my grandmother always told me. We'll just name it after her and boom, we'll figure out how to make it connect or whatever. Versus Eve, I came in and I did an interview that inspired me about the lineage, you know, from Nina Simone to Roberta Flack to myself in North Carolina.
North Carolina artist.
Yeah, that's how it started. And I go home and I'm just got a beat and how does the beat make me feel? And I've always had this concept for about 4 or 5 years. I want to do a song about being a tomboy. It was even self-reflection of how people looked at me, the way I dress. She's a tomboy. We think we know your sexual orientation, like all these judgments based on just me being a tomboy, right? And it was just like, man, Aaliyah she was a tomboy, but she was still sexy. I've always had this concept and I just got the beat and I wrote it and I'm like, oh, what if I do a whole conceptual album? I like Felicia, I like Queen Latifah, I like Lauren, I like Maxine Waters, so I'm writing a list of women down. I'm like, okay, what do they represent for me in my life? So now that album is done completely different.
My ultimate creative goal, I think, is just to inspire, to be an example for someone else. Listen to my music, watch my video, read something I wrote, and I hope it plants a seed for you or is a light that helps to guide you on your own journey.
You're so intimately linked to the future of the UK. What are you seeing when you go to branches and in the country?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of anxiety at the moment. I think the recovery from the pandemic has been and is continuing to be very strong. So I think we're seeing the economy recover. But with rising interest rates, with inflation, those are things that peoples and families and businesses haven't had to deal with for 10 years. So a lot of business owners today haven't had to operate in that environment. So it's causing quite a lot of anxiety, which means for us, because we're up and down the country in branches and offices, we can spend a lot of time talking to businesses and helping them plan and deal with it. But it is, it's very different, and it's not something people have had to operate in for a long time.
The top names in business are on Bloomberg.
For Indigo, this is a 500 planes order. That's the biggest order ever in terms of number of planes. It doesn't change the short-term perspective on ramping up the production.
All our aircraft deliveries are delayed. The supply chain that was really decimated during COVID.
It's a real challenge for all the OEMs at the moment, but we absolutely have to have those aircraft delivered on time.
Nobody covers business like Bloomberg, your global business authority. Bloomberg covers the world with unmatched reach and resources. From more than 120 countries, the moment news breaks, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
In a multi-trillion-dollar industry, there's a lot of ground to cover.
We indeed have a rally.
We're talking a lot of dividends. We're talking income.
We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Watch Bloomberg ETF IQ. From the world of politics to the world of business. Every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, hosts Anne-Marie Hordern and Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live from Bloomberg's Washington headquarters. Get the latest from and about politics' biggest power players at the end of every trading day. Balance of Power, every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
The Pimp a Butterfly moment was an enormous moment of inflection.
Mm-hmm.
Another huge moment was being nominated for the Grammy for Rap Album of the Year. As, you know, an artist who is critically acclaimed and lauded for their art, but not necessarily, you know, sitting center stage, how does a moment like that, how is that transformative for your professional life?
That was a huge moment of acknowledgement. There's something in being acknowledged for all the sacrifices and the hard work that you've made, and to be able to stand beside your peers and, you know, the legends that inspired you, that lets you know, like, you do belong here. That moment was bittersweet for me personally. Grammys is the height of music that you could be acknowledged as. To be acknowledged on that stage is like, oh, shit. But growing up, that was never on my list of things, right? You know, I was a young Black girl, and I looked up, I really loved my Blackness, so I looked up to the BETs and the Source Awards and the NAACP Awards, and it's like, those were my Grammys, right? And at that time, before the Grammy nominations, I'd never been nominated for any of those, so it was like, damn, right? Because the music I made, I appreciate everybody that listens to it, but I'm speaking specifically to, you know, someone that might be feeling like I feel that looks like me. I really want to connect with my people, like, what's the disconnect that I'm having here? Especially with women, like, I always thought women would be my biggest fan base, like Black women, but they're not. It's Black men are my biggest fan base, or men in general. And so I always go back with, like, man, that was never like, what's wrong with you? That's always a self-reflection. Like, what am I doing? Like, what's the disconnect for me? And so, you know, at that moment, it was like, damn, we at the height of music, but am I connected with my people?
Refusing to compromise her fiercely independent artistic vision, Rhapsody continues to maintain a laser-like focus on her craft. As she approaches her 15th year as a signed artist, Rhapsody is digging deeper than ever to unearth her most candid and most vulnerable body of work to date.
You are now 15 years into your career.
Mm-hmm.
The wear and tear on your mind and heart and
I'm feeling it
knees
too.
and everything else. How do you think about work-life balance, given how consequential the level of grind was to your sort of elevation and ascension? Have your feelings about that changed, and how do you manage that?
I don't regret, you know, the time and the sacrifices that I did make. And I think that that balance is important, even in developing who you are as a person in your artistry. Like, I think balance is super important for your mind. I sit back sometimes and I'm just like, I'm glad I worked as hard as I did, but I do wish I had taken a little bit more time to kind of enjoy life, you know? These days, I'm a lot more kind with myself and resting, taking a vacation, and trusting that you can afford to do that because you worked hard enough and you built enough solid foundation where, you can give to yourself some too. I find myself like, okay, I'm gonna go out tonight. I'm not gonna record tonight. Yo, I'm gonna go on that date tonight, you know. And I've had a couple relationships the last few years, but yeah, and I feel like the music is better because of it. I have so much life that I've lived lately because I've allowed myself to have that balance, to live it, to experience things, to experience love, to experience heartbreak, joy, like all of it. This season of life is a lot more balanced.
When I think about success, I hate to call anything luck, really. You make decisions, you make choices, and based on the decisions you make and the choices you make, you know, you find yourself in situations that allow you to reach a goal and be successful. It's all in how you react to whatever you're presented with or whatever experience that you have.
It's interesting to me that you would say that this is sort of a more revealed record, because I've never felt that your music was not revealed. So I guess my question is, what does that mean? Like, what is the layer that we have not been privy to as listeners?
I'm so guarded in a way. Like, I give a little bit of myself, but I usually hide it in a simile, a metaphor, or I might tell it in a story format and necessarily not always shine a light on me. And I went to see No ID at some point while I was making this album, just playing him records, and, you know, he was like, we know you can rap, but what's after that? He's like, I don't know who you are, right? So it's me diving in, like, this is who I am. These are the things that make me mad. This is what love looks like to me. This is insecurities that I have, like allowing myself to be naked and free and be human. Going through the path I've gone through, especially like when we go back to how people even reacted to my physical appearance and how harsh the internet could be like that. I'm like, I ain't telling y'all nothing, right? Y'all mean. But now it's just like, I'm just so okay and free because I've healed, or things that I haven't, I'm in the process of healing. So I'm okay just allowing myself to be, you know, and understanding like any judgment that comes from that, it's really not about me at the end of the day. It's a reflection of the person on the other end. And now I'm okay and comfortable in allowing you to see me. So that's what it is. Like, not necessarily who's Rhapsody, who's Marlena, you know?
Was that challenging to unlock that part of yourself and to allow yourself to be revealed and sort of vulnerable in that way?
Yeah, even like being down to the final hours that I am now of this project, I have days where I wake up like, do you really want to put that song out? Like, you can still be vulnerable without telling all your business. And I always go back to like, my story is going to help somebody else be okay with it. This is part of your growth to be okay. So yeah, it's definitely hard to be naked in front of the world, especially the world that we live in, where people don't even take the time to really sit with what you're saying and expressing and listen to you in a non-judgmental way. It's like everybody just, we got to have an opinion about it and say it. So, you know, it's like, I don't know what's going to come with this, but at the same time, I don't care because I'm on to the next thing anyway. You know, if you're not uncomfortable, are you really healing or growing? And so it's like, it's okay. You can sit and be uncomfortable. Like, you're not going to die from it. So, yeah, it's challenging and it's scary and, you know, it shakes me up sometimes, but at the same time, I also get this thrill from it. Like, yo, I'm excited to just be okay. This is what it is. I'm not perfect, and neither are you.
Along your path, you know, you've talked extensively about the level of discipline and the volume of just sheer hours that you've put into this and sacrificed an enormous portion of your life to making all of this art. And you are now talking about sort of sacrificing a wall between you and the audience that is sort of your most intimate, private moments.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get back what you put into all of this when the dust settles?
I don't know. That's another thing. I'm okay with saying I don't know these days. I think if I look at it from what you do get back is a type of freedom, you know, and success in a way that, you know, you did something that was uncomfortable. You allowed yourself to grow and be evolving and trying to learn how to do more. The day that I feel like I've mastered it and all, it's just a breeze. I need to do something else, right? Like, all right, what's the challenge?
Any good reporter has a moment when you hear a little click in your mind. And that click is, this is a hell of a story.
This is killing American children. Asbestos was found in my tissues. I'm like, they're trying to kill me.
Babies born now are so impacted about what happened, yet there's no will to change it.
MasterCard introduced PayPass, its first contactless payment system, in 2002, but the technology took some time to gain traction.
I would say we first invested in this many years ago. The adoption rate on this in the early part, even in markets like the UK, Canada, Australia, was fairly slow in the early part. The inflection point of when it really started to hit its stride was when it was used in the transit vertical. So what we figured is, let's get all the transit systems around the globe enabled for contactless technology. That will create muscle memory for the consumer who will like the experience in transit and will use it elsewhere.
How do you judge the revenue proposition for MasterCard with an innovation like that and the adoption and the pace of it?
Look, I mean, for us, we're agnostic as to whether somebody's using the chip technology or the contactless technology or, you know, using the mag stripe, which was the old way of doing business. We earn revenues which are quite similar across both of those. The revenue potential and upside for us comes from the fact that now more spend is being done on card-based forms of payment than was being done in the past. So we're converting that cash over to electronic forms of payment, which is where the incremental revenue comes from.
If contactless payments is the current revolution sweeping the payments industry, what's the next one?
I think pay with your smile. So, biometrics.
Can you believe it's summer already? That means it's time for the Boston Pops Fireworks Spectacular. And Bloomberg will make sure you see all the fireworks, music, and special appearances by pop superstars En Vogue, chart-topping country duo Low Cash, and film, TV, and Broadway powerhouse Mandy Gonzalez. Plus the U.S. Army Field Band and the cast of the Broadway musical Ragtime. It all starts tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern right here on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Lots happening on Wall Street.
There are so many factors at play today.
It remains tight in certain parts of the economy.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insight.
Crisis is too strong a word, and words like that get used a lot.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
America's economy needs a diversity of institutions. That's something that Wall Street pays a lot of attention to.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week, live Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
He certainly didn't come across as anybody who was out to swindle you.
We just brainstorm and then we execute ideas and we fine-tune them.
He didn't come across as anybody who had, evil in his heart.
How can we be better in this? How can we be better in that?
Or wanted to hurt anybody, or who you couldn't trust.
We've been doing this for some time now, and we immediately respond to those concerns.
He didn't come across as any of those things.
It doesn't
become less bizarre when I tell you the details. He was running a nursing home company, and he all of a sudden becomes one of the biggest mine owners in Appalachia.
I guess I would almost call it a restoration economy. We're restoring the environment.
He called himself an environmentalist. He was going to save the planet and save the coal industry.
He had a scheme to fund reclamation. To us, it seemed like circular logic from the beginning.
Struggled to make his loan payments to the state, abandoned his plans, dashing hopes he had raised in the town. It was always just, some great thing that was about to happen. The check was in the mail, but it never was. If somebody asked me my advice about doing business with Tom Clark, I'd say run and hide. What's going on, man? Why? So what you gonna do? I don't really believe in missions for papers. It's just try to be an honest, old-fashioned newspaper. Print what's interesting and true and informative, and there we are. I first heard about Tom Clark, first heard his name in February 2014 when he bought the Natural Bridge of Virginia. It's what Rockbridge County is named after, so Natural Bridge is a big deal here. And the bridge was up for sale, and it's about 1,600 acres of land, and it was going to get chopped into a pile of different pieces and auctioned off. And people around here were horrified with that notion. Tom Clark, the community viewed him as someone who rode in here on a white horse with a white hat, who would save Natural Bridge and could do God knows what else to help the community. Then he fell behind almost instantly in his payments to the state. And one of the things that he told the state, and he told me, was he was going to get into the coal business to make the payments for Natural Bridge.
To the extent we can make thermal coal cleaner, we've got an opportunity to actually be able to sell more coal out of West Virginia.
When Tom Clark came along, the coal industry was in a really deep downturn. All the big coal companies went broke. They were out of cash, and they had a lot of old mines that hadn't been cleaned up yet. Federal law requires that when a coal mine operation is complete, that they restore the land back to its original condition, restore it to its original contours, plant grass on it, and clean up all the poisoned water caused by the mining activity. And so the big coal companies came up with this plan to essentially shift those obligations onto other people. And Tom Clark was one of those other people. He had no background in coal whatsoever. He was in the Navy. He worked in finance and accounting jobs. He built a nursing home company that got really big at one point, like 100 nursing homes, and then sort of went broke. And he ended up taking a few of those homes and forming a company called Casito.
At Casito Healthcare, over 96% of our patients would refer us to a friend. And to me, that's
certainly the most unlikely person to take over, over 100 Appalachian coal mines.
Tom Clark, we had not heard of him before. He did not own any coal companies and hadn't really been involved in mining. But he took on a bunch of permits that were previously owned by Patriot Coal.
Patriot Coal in the coal fields is sometimes called a liability dump. Two of the biggest coal companies, Peabody and Arch, spun off kind of their unwanted mines and a lot of their health care and pension obligations as separate companies. And then those two companies merged, and that's what Patriot is. And some people believe that from the very beginning, these companies were set up to fail. So Patriot went bankrupt in 2015, and that's where Tom Clark came in. He swooped in and said, I'll take all those mines that nobody else wants. He said he was going to clean up all these old derelict mines, but he was also going to develop this new market for carbon neutral coal, where the carbon emissions from the coal would be offset by planting trees somewhere else.
When he said he was going to save the coal industry and save the planet all at once, I burst out laughing because it doesn't make any sense. well, I'm going to get these mines, I'm going to sell the coal for a little bit more because I'm going to plant trees all over the place. And the consumers of coal are going to be happy to pay a little more knowing that I'm going to plant trees. Well, there wasn't any indication that he was planting trees or that he could plant trees. And so this notion of somehow I'm going to be a wonderful shade of green coal mine operator, just give me a break.
The idea of trees plus mines has challenges. It's unclear who would buy this greener coal. Again, Tom Clark.
I guess we're sort of betting the farm that we're going to create a market.
Environmentalists hated his idea. They didn't want him to find new ways to dig more coal. And so really from the beginning, there was no prospect of a market for this kind of coal packaged with carbon credits that he was selling.
I don't know if he had a grand plan. You know, part of me thinks what he did with Natural Bridge established his cred in the environmental world. Here I'm this great environmentalist, I've saved Natural Bridge, and I've done it by setting up the Virginia Conservation Legacy Fund, for God's sake. Who could argue with a name like that?
Tom Clark and Kim McCoy of the Virginia Conservation Legacy Fund. Let's give this team a round of applause.
Part of me thinks that he got Natural Bridge in order to climb into the coal business. And part of me thinks he just stumbled from one thing into the other.
Clark had a lot of stuff. He had an iron mine in Minnesota. He had a gold mine in California. He also tried to corner the market on offshore oil and gas platforms. He owned a historic Coast Guard vessel, definitely more than $1 billion of assets. He was totally a mogul, but it was all other people's money. Clark did do a lot of coal mine reclamation. He spent tens of millions of dollars. However, eventually he just ran out of money. He just didn't have any more and was unable to even do basic maintenance. Towards the end of his operation, he stopped paying the company that took all the water samples to test all the water around his mines. When the state finally put his company in receivership in 2020, they said that they had issued something like 160 notices of violations. It's a great question. Did he somehow find a way of making money off of all these deals? They all ended up in bankruptcy or receivership of one kind or another. But is there some way he could have shifted money to himself in somewhere where that nobody knows about?
Mr. Clark, you on the phone?
I am, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
For his part, he was forced to go into court and basically say, I'm totally broke. It's all gone. And if you look at the dozens of lawsuits that creditors have brought against him, they've accused him of improperly moving money around a lot. But oftentimes it's to take money from one doomed project that's about to go bankrupt and put it into another doomed project that's also eventually going to fall out of his control.
Anything else we need to take up in this AP this morning?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you.
Your Honor. Thank you very much.
Thank y'all.
At the time Clark was doing all this stuff, he was actually very chatty. He was talking to the media all the time about his grand plans.
Reforestation in West Virginia, it puts people back to work. It's part of a transition economy, a restoration economy.
You know, we'd talk on the phone fairly regularly. He'd say, my lawyers tell me I shouldn't talk to you. And then he'd sing like a bird.
But since things went south and virtually all of his companies collapsed, he's kind of not apparently in a position to talk to anybody right now about it.
Hi, it's a message for Tom Clark. This is Zach Miter calling from Bloomberg News.
I called, emailed, and sent a number of letters to various addresses he uses, but I never heard back. This has been kind of an uncomfortable topic in West Virginia because when Clark's company went broke, the state actually had to step in and place it in this kind of unusual, unprecedented receivership because they were afraid that the damage that this company could cause if it was just allowed to go into an uncontrolled bankruptcy could kind of take down the entire coal industry. So they had to sort of get control of it and essentially have a court-appointed receiver control it to keep it from causing collateral damage.
Tom Clark was an extreme example, but he's not unique. We have seen a lot of mines transferred to coal companies that don't seem like they're really up for managing or reclaiming those mines. And in theory, regulators should be able to stop these transfers from happening. If they don't think it's a good idea or it won't work out, they can try to stop the transfers. And perhaps more importantly, the states want the coal mines transferred as well because they don't want the reclamation liability to fall to the state agencies. So there's a lot of incentive for regulators to approve mine transfers, even if they're to really weird guys like Tom Clark.
So in some ways, Tom Clark is kind of the fall guy. He's the one who the coal industry found who was willing to kind of ride these old mines into the ground. He was the guy willing to hold the hand grenade when it was about to go off.
Tom, you and your vision for what this can be is truly a blessing to Southern West Virginia.
He obviously was seen as a visionary because he was written up in, you know, all these high-powered newspapers around the country. Coal miners' lives would be better again, and the environment would get straight, and he'd fix all these things. So, yeah, anybody who says they're going to do that, if you believe it, they're a visionary. Whether he was a visionary or not, time will tell.
From the world of politics
We're not going to be relying upon countries whose values we don't share.
to the world of business.
It's all about corporate power at the end.
Balance of Power, live from Bloomberg's Washington headquarters.
We couldn't be more excited what's in store for you.
How long will it take? How many years? Why don't we take this one day at a time?
Good luck. Everybody has a perspective.
Every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Join hosts Anne-Marie Hordern
It's the one area, really, of bipartisanship.
I think we're getting more, but
That's optimistic.
and Joe Matthew.
the debt ceiling is looming. How close are we going to get to the line before you start to worry?
Alongside Kaylee
The
Lines.
door was open for regulators to do more, and that puts the Fed between a rock and a hard place.
As they deliver news
This is such an important economic issue.
He's no longer trying to run away from
That
it.
really blew some minds.
insight,
We can both invest in law enforcement and also make sure that communities feel safe in their own skin.
and analysis.
I think your audience will get this more than most. This is not the Republican Party that you know.
It allows him to do what he did so successfully in 2020, which is run against crazy.
From and about politics' biggest power players.
This was the zombie case, and it's now more than well alive.
That's for sure. With two more potentially to come. I'm willing to have this battle.
It is vitally important.
This is the intersection of Washington and Wall Street.
Bringing people directly to the decision makers
Right.
that impact your investments and your life.
Balance of Power, every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern, only on Bloomberg, your global business authority. Business Week Radio, live weekday afternoons at 3 p.m. Eastern.
We got a little bit of talking.
Come on, are you guys ready?
Harnessing the power of Bloomberg Business Week, Carol Masser and Tim Stanovic bring you the latest news from the worlds of business, technology, politics, and more.
How does the Fed play into this and what the Fed does potentially?
This is so exhausting and this is so all-encompassing.
Listen on Bloomberg Radio and streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals.
Why does everybody want to be a consultant, and what are all these consultants doing?
Well, David, I think that we actually defy the label consultant because sometimes consultant seems to imply that we only give advice. And when you look at what Accenture does, We're really different than the traditional version of a consultant. We're really about relevance and results, and that's what is driving our business.
What about a consulting project? In my example, I'm the CEO, I have a problem, I call you up, I say, solve my problem or give me a solution.
We don't operate as big companies permanently in crisis mode. And so when you think about, like, how long does it solve things